I suppose this is how it's meant to be, isn't it? The wedding of your dreams. The man of your dreams. All wrapped up in ribbons of white lace and the scent of roses. When I had imagined my wedding day as a girl, I pictured a day full of joy, smiles, and love. And today, as I stood in the quaint little chapel with its stone walls and stained glass windows, the day I had always dreamed of was finally here. I had everything I ever wanted. Everything. That is. Except the peace I had imagined. It started with the little things. The murmurs that ran through the crowd as I walked down the aisle. The tension in the air I couldn't quite place. Charlie, my beloved Charlie, looked at me with the same affection that had made me fall in love with him in the first place. His smile was warm, reassuring, and in that moment, I believed it was all that mattered. But then, there was Lady Margaret and Sir Reginald. I hadn't expected them to make a scene, of course not. They were always too poised for that. But I couldn't ignore the way their eyes followed me. Scrutinizing. Measuring. I noticed Lady Margaret's delicate but critical glances. Her lips pressed tightly together, as though she were assessing every aspect of me, the way my dress sat on my body, the way I carried myself, even the way I smiled. I had been warned, of course. People had said, "You know how she is." But there was something about the way she looked at me. Something I couldn't quite pin down. It was as if she were seeing straight through me. And then there was Sir Reginald, always so controlled, so composed, as though he were the patriarch of some old royal family. His eyes always just a little too calculating. His smile a little too thin. I could feel his gaze, steady and unblinking, as though he were assessing the very worth of my being here in his world. It was subtle. All of it. The kind of tension you don't notice until you've been holding your breath for far too long. The ceremony itself went as planned. The vows, the rings, the promises. Charlie and I stood there, hands clasped together, exchanging words of love and devotion. Our friends and family smiling and clapping, their faces full of joy. But for me, there was something else beneath it all. Something like a heaviness I couldn't shake. I tried to ignore it, to focus on Charlie, to let the love we shared take over. After all, this was our day, wasn't it? When we stepped outside the chapel, the sun was shining brightly on us, the sound of the bells still echoing in my ears. The air was fresh, crisp with that faint trace of autumn. Guests were milling around, congratulating us, taking photographs. It should have been a perfect moment. It should have been the beginning of forever. And yet, as we made our way through the crowd, I felt a strange tightness in my chest. My eyes kept flicking back to Charlie's parents, who stood a little to the side, as though watching, waiting. They weren't participating in the conversation, or engaging in the excitement around them. They were apart, observing. I tried to push the feeling down, to tell myself I was being paranoid. After all, Charlie was my husband now, wasn't he? Surely that should be enough. But even as we walked toward the reception, Charlie's hand in mine, I couldn't help but notice how his parents remained distant, aloof, and strangely quiet. It was like they had stepped out of time, as if the world they lived in and the world I had just entered were not the same. The reception was held in the grand Fitzwilliam estate, a sprawling house tucked away in the countryside. The garden had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale, flowers everywhere, the hum of laughter filling the air. But as we stepped inside, I noticed how everything about this place was imposing. The tall ceilings, the heavy drapes, the polished wood floors. It all felt grand, yes, but it also felt distant, cold, and I couldn't ignore the feeling that the walls themselves were watching me. Charlie was beside me most of the evening, his arm around me, his laugh infectious. Yet, each time I looked up at his parents, I felt that nagging sensation return. Lady Margaret and Sir Reginald, standing by the grand fireplace, exchanging quiet words with other guests, their eyes glancing my way with such precision that it almost felt like a test. They spoke little to me directly, but their presence was undeniable. I should have been more at ease, should have felt the warmth of the occasion. After all, it was my wedding, wasn't it? And Charlie was the one who had chosen me. But the more I tried to push those feelings aside, the more they crept up on me. It wasn't just their gazes. It was something about the way they moved, the way they held themselves. It was as though they were in a place of power, a place where I wasn't quite sure I belonged. The night wore on, the guests dancing, the music playing, and I could feel Charlie's warmth beside me, his hand resting comfortably on my back. But every so often, when he wasn't looking, I would glance back at his parents. They seemed to be having their own quiet conversation in the corner, their faces too composed, their voices low, as though they were discussing something serious, something important. It was difficult to shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't quite see, something I wasn't sure I wanted to. When we finally left the reception, Charlie and I in the back of the car, I leaned my head against the window, staring out at the passing countryside. The night was still young, the stars twinkling above us, but I felt off, like I was carrying something heavy I couldn't quite place. Charlie, ever the optimist, was full of excitement about the days ahead. Tomorrow, we'll start our lives together, he said, his voice full of hope and promise. No more interruptions, no more anything, just us. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that this day was the start of everything I'd ever wanted. But as I glanced back at the lights of the Fitzwilliam estate fading behind us, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that I wasn't just entering a new chapter with Charlie, I was stepping into a world I didn't fully understand, a world I wasn't sure I could navigate. I didn't want to admit it, not even to myself. But as Charlie rested his hand on mine, I wondered how much of our future would be truly ours and how much of it would be shaped by forces beyond our control. His parents, his legacy, his world, it was all so much bigger than I had imagined. And as we drove away into the night, I couldn't help but feel, for the first time, a little uncertain about what was to come. I remember the first morning I woke up in the Fitzwilliam home. The sun had barely crept through the curtains, casting a soft glow on the grand, empty room. Everything in the house seemed to have a polished, unspoken expectation. The walls, the furniture, the thick drapes, all of it exhaled a deep, quiet tradition, as though the house itself had lived through centuries of inherited knowledge. And there I was, a stranger in this world, the new bride of a man who had always belonged to it. Charlie had already left for the office, his early morning departure almost routine now. I was left behind in this imposing, almost museum-like space, with no clear direction of what I was supposed to do next. There was no rush, no pressing demands on me, just the weight of tradition pressing down on my shoulders, filling every corner of the room. I should have felt at home. I should have felt comfortable. But instead, it was as though I was a visitor in my own life, watching it unfold from the outside. The house had its own rhythm, its own rules, and I was expected to fit in. That first day, Lady Margaret didn't waste any time. As I wandered through the halls, still unsure of where I belonged, she appeared beside me, as if by design. She was wearing a soft blue cardigan, her perfectly done hair barely moving even as she walked briskly down the long corridor. Her smile was tight, cordial, but there was an edge to it, like the smile of someone who had just discovered a piece of something misplaced and was wondering how long it had been there. "Ellie, dear," she began, her voice as calm as a winter morning, "I trust you're settling in well." Her eyes scanned me, assessing. "I am, thank you," I replied, trying to sound confident. I wasn't sure what else to say. "Good," she said, nodding as if she had been waiting for the answer. "You see, we do things a certain way around here. A tradition, really. Nothing too complicated. Just the little details." Her eyes flicked to the staircase, then back to me. "For example, breakfast is at precisely 8:30. Not a moment later. The kettle should be on by then, and the table set, just so we keep everything in order." She said it so matter-of-factly, as though I should have known this already. I nodded, though my mind was racing. I hadn't been told about breakfast time, or the table settings, or anything else really. I hadn't been told that there was a set, rigid structure to every moment of the day. But I nodded, pretending to understand, pretending that this was all just part of the rhythm. Lady Margaret wasn't one to sit idle. It wasn't long before she handed me the daily schedule. At first glance, it looked harmless enough. A list of chores, meals, and appointments, all neatly written out with clear, bold headings. Her handwriting was immaculate, almost like a piece of art. There were no surprises, no room for deviation. Everything had its place, its time, its order. It wasn't as though I minded some structure. I liked having things organized, even in my own life. But this was something else. It was as if I was being told, not asked, to fit into a mold that didn't seem to have space for my own way of doing things. I had always been independent, someone who made decisions for herself, someone who trusted her instincts. But here, under this roof, I was learning to bend to rules I didn't know existed. Lunch that day was a rather quiet affair. I had made the mistake of suggesting a more modern approach to preparing the vegetables. Something quick and easy. I had thought nothing of it, given that the modern world now embraced speed and simplicity in the kitchen. But Lady Margaret's sharp look cut through my attempt at efficiency. She didn't need to say much, her look was enough to make me feel as if I had committed some grave error. "It's nice to make things simpler, dear," she remarked, her voice dripping with unspoken meaning. "But you must understand, there is something to be said for proper methods. Traditional methods." I could feel her eyes on me as I fumbled through my preparation, the knife not cutting as smoothly as I had hoped. It didn't seem to matter that the food would taste just the same, or that I had more than enough experience cooking for myself. What mattered was that I had dared to bring something new into the kitchen, something uninvited. As the days wore on, I found myself retreating further into the shadows of the house, my confidence fading with each passing moment. I began to notice every glance, every sigh, every look that seemed to be laden with judgment. It wasn't just the kitchen, or the timetable that felt constraining. It was everything. The way Lady Margaret would watch me in the drawing room as I tried to arrange the flowers in the vase, her lips pursed, as though evaluating my technique. The way Sir Reginald would dismiss any of my suggestions, no matter how simple, as a bit too avant-garde for our tastes. I'm afraid it wasn't that they didn't want to be kind. They were polite, at least on the surface, but everything I did seemed to be under a microscope, each movement scrutinized, as though I were a student still learning the ropes of an intricate and exacting art. I began to feel like a puppet. There were invisible strings attached to me pulling at my movements, my words, my choices. I never quite understood the rules, but I knew the moment I broke them. And when I did, the reprimands were not spoken aloud, but they were clear nonetheless. Lady Margaret's tight smile, Sir Reginald's dismissive gesture, they all reminded me, with their silences, that I was not free to do as I pleased. I was expected to conform. The only one who seemed somewhat sympathetic was Charlie. But even he had his limits. He had grown up in this house, under these rules. To him, it was normal. When I expressed my frustration, he would gently reassure me, saying, "You'll get used to it, Ellie. It's just how things are done here." But I wasn't sure I could get used to it. I missed the simplicity of my own life, my flat, my routine, my quiet independence. I longed for the freedom to make my own decisions without fearing judgment. But here, I was trapped between wanting to please Charlie and the suffocating reality of his parents' expectations. Every time I tried to assert myself, I was met with resistance. I felt my identity slipping away, piece by piece, until I was a mere reflection of what they expected me to be: quiet, compliant, eager to please. As the days passed, I found myself growing more and more resentful. I began to question how long I could keep up the charade, pretending that I was comfortable in this golden cage. I wasn't sure if I could break free, or if I even had the strength to try. But one thing was clear. Something in me was shifting, and I wasn't sure where it would lead. But for now, I simply carried on, my every move measured and controlled, trying my best to fit into a world that felt more like a dream than a life I could call my own. And all the while, Charlie remained at my side, blissfully unaware of how his family's control was changing me, piece by piece. Dinner that night had started off as any other. At least, that's what I told myself. A simple meal, nothing extraordinary, a few friends, a glass of wine, and a chance to relax after a long day. But nothing felt normal anymore. Not with them. The Fitzwilliam family was never without an air of formality. Even when we were alone, there was always something calculated about the way Lady Margaret set the table, the way Sir Reginald walked through the house, as if every movement had been practiced and perfected over generations. This time, however, it was my turn to cook. I had offered, eager to contribute in my small way to this household. It wasn't that I had no experience in the kitchen. On the contrary, I had always enjoyed cooking for myself. But here, it was different. Here, nothing seemed good enough. As I moved about the kitchen, chopping vegetables and stirring the sauce, I could feel the weight of the house pressing on me. The silence from the other room was heavy. Lady Margaret's soft voice floated in from the drawing room, her words too low to hear but unmistakably present, like the hum of a distant storm. Sir Reginald occasionally chimed in with his deep baritone, his sentences measured, always with that hint of command. It was as though they were waiting for something, waiting for me to falter, which, of course, I did. I should have known. I should have known that there was no room for error here. The mistake was small, almost insignificant in the grand scheme of things. A slight change to the recipe, an extra pinch of salt. But it was enough. Lady Margaret's sharp eyes caught it almost immediately. Just as I placed the dish on the table, her gaze lingered for a moment longer than necessary, and then she pursed her lips. "Ellie," she said, her voice calm but sharp, "this isn't quite what I had in mind. The sauce is a bit overdone, don't you think? And the seasoning, a little heavy-handed." The words were polite, but the weight of them was unmistakable. As if I had made a grave mistake. As if my failure was not just a simple oversight but a reflection of my entire upbringing. I stood there, my hand still gripping the serving spoon, my heart sinking. I had tried so hard. Sir Reginald didn't let the moment pass without adding his own remarks. "In my experience," he said, his voice firm, "a woman should be able to manage these sorts of things without much difficulty. After all, it's not complicated, is it?" My cheeks burned. I felt exposed, like a child being scolded for something so trivial. I had made dinner, something I had done countless times before, and yet in their eyes, it was a failure. I turned to look at Charlie, hoping for some kind of reassurance, but he remained silent, his eyes focused on his plate. He did not meet my gaze, as though he, too, had been trained to ignore the tension in the room. To accept it. It felt like the most painful thing of all, that I had become the cause of this discomfort. This coldness. I wanted to speak, to defend myself. But what was the point? What good would it do? Instead, I stood there, my hand still on the spoon, feeling smaller and smaller with each passing second. The rest of the dinner was a blur. I could feel Lady Margaret's eyes on me throughout the meal, her sharp gaze never far from my movements, never satisfied. Even as I tried to engage in conversation with the other guests, I felt like I was failing at every turn. I could never seem to say the right thing. I didn't know how to fit in with them, how to be part of this world. It was as if I were constantly out of place, misjudging every action, every word, every gesture. And Charlie had said nothing. He said nothing when his mother pointed out my mistake, said nothing when his father made it clear that I had failed to meet their standards. He said nothing at all, and I began to wonder if I had imagined the man I had fallen in love with. The man who had promised me a life of partnership, of love, of equality. After dinner, I retreated to the sitting room, hoping for a moment of solitude. But there was no peace to be found. The house felt suffocating, the silence oppressive. I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock, each second passing as slowly as the last. Every corner of the room seemed to weigh me down. I sat on the couch, my thoughts swirling. How had I gotten here? How had I become the person who could make a simple meal feel like the gravest of errors? I thought back to the woman I was before, the woman I was when I was just Ellie Thomas, independent, confident, unafraid to stand her ground. I had always known who I was, had always known my worth. I had been proud of that woman. But now? Now I wasn't so sure. When I had married Charlie, I had imagined a future of mutual respect, of shared dreams. I had imagined us as equals, creating our own life together. But what had I stepped into? A world where nothing I did was good enough, where every action was scrutinized, where every decision was questioned. A world where I felt like a child again, trying desperately to meet the expectations of people who didn't even know me. I thought about the things I had left behind, my friends, my old life, the person I used to be. They felt so distant now, like memories of a different time. I felt as though I had traded all of that for this gilded cage, for a life where my every move was controlled by invisible strings. As the days passed, the tension only grew. Each meal, each interaction, each look from Lady Margaret and Sir Reginald tightened the noose around my neck. I no longer felt like the woman Charlie had married. I no longer felt like myself. I had been swallowed whole by the weight of their expectations, by the constant need to prove myself worthy of a place in this family. Charlie remained as he always had, a quiet observer, never challenging the status quo. And I wondered, was this what I had married into? A world where my voice didn't matter, where my opinions were dismissed, where I was simply an accessory to his family's legacy. In moments of solitude, I would find myself staring at my reflection, searching for the woman I once was, the woman who had stood confidently in the face of life's challenges. But all I could see now was a stranger, someone who had lost herself in the pursuit of something that felt increasingly hollow. I didn't know how much longer I could keep pretending. The more I tried to fit into this world, the more I lost myself. And the more I lost myself, the more I began to question whether I had truly known who I was to begin with. But for now, all I could do was wait for the next family dinner, the next moment when I would be tested. Would it be enough this time? Would I finally meet their expectations? Or would I fail again? And more importantly, would I ever find my way back to the woman I had once been? It was one of those evenings, and the house was quiet, too quiet. It had been one of those days where every moment seemed to stretch on endlessly, each interaction with Lady Margaret or Sir Reginald leaving me feeling more exhausted than the last. By the time the evening rolled around, I could feel the weight of it all bearing down on me, suffocating me. The house, the rules, the expectations, they were all around me, inescapable. I had spent the entire afternoon in the garden, trying to clear my head, trying to find a space where I could breathe, if only for a moment. But even there, I felt like an outsider. The walls of the estate, the carefully manicured grounds, the family heirlooms tucked away in every corner, they all seemed to watch me, judging, measuring. And now, here I was, standing in our bedroom, the place I had once thought would be our sanctuary, the place where I could be myself, where I could finally feel safe. But it wasn't that way anymore. The silence was deafening, and the tension between Charlie and me was palpable. Charlie had just come in from the study. His shoulders slumped, his expression tired. He had spent the last hour going through paperwork for some business deal, his focus on anything but me, anything but the growing distance between us. I could feel it now, the tension that had been building for weeks, the frustration that had been eating at me from the inside out. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I turned to him, my voice low but firm. "Charlie, we need to talk." He glanced up, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "Ellie, not tonight. I'm exhausted." "I don't care," I said, my words sharper than I intended. "I can't keep pretending everything's fine. I can't keep pretending I'm happy." His face hardened. "What are you talking about?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. "I didn't marry your family, Charlie. I married you. But somehow, I'm living in a house where my every move is dictated by them. Where's the woman I was? Where is the woman who made her own choices?" My voice cracked as I spoke, the frustration and hurt spilling out all at once. "I've lost myself, Charlie. And it's because of them." There was a long pause as Charlie stared at me, his face a mask of confusion and frustration. "Ellie, you're being unreasonable. They're my parents. You can't expect me to choose between you and them." I shook my head, unable to hide the disbelief in my voice. "It's not about choosing, Charlie. It's about respect. It's about me having a voice, about me being more than just an extension of your family. I don't want to live in this house anymore. I don't want to live by their rules. But every time I try to speak up, I'm shut down. Every time I try to make a decision, I'm told I'm wrong." I could feel my throat tighten as I spoke, the weight of my own words finally sinking in. I hadn't realized how much I had been holding back until now, how much I had swallowed just to keep the peace, just to keep Charlie from getting upset. But not anymore. "I don't even know who I am anymore," I continued, my voice trembling. "I'm not the woman I was before we got married. I'm not the woman I want to be. I'm just someone trying to fit into a world that isn't mine." Charlie's jaw tightened, and I saw the familiar defensiveness in his eyes. He wasn't listening to me. He was hearing only what he wanted to hear. "Ellie, you can't just change everything overnight. My parents mean well, you know they do. They've done so much for us. For you. You need to try harder to fit in with them. Try harder." The words stung. They felt like another layer of weight added to the pile I was already carrying. "I have tried, Charlie. I've tried harder than you'll ever know. But nothing I do is good enough. Nothing will ever be good enough for them." There was a silence that stretched between us, thick and heavy. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the anger and hurt bubbling up inside me. I had never been this angry before. I had never felt this lost. "I'm not asking you to choose between me and them," I said, my voice a little steadier now, "but I need you to choose me. I need you to stand by me, to see me as your equal, not as someone who has to bend and conform to their every whim. I need you to see me, really see me." But Charlie, as usual, remained silent, his eyes focused on some point beyond me, his posture stiff. He wasn't listening. He wasn't with me. I could feel the tears welling in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I had already let enough of my vulnerability show. I had already said too much. You know, I said softly. I thought when I married you, it would be the start of something new. Something of our own. But it's not. I've spent the last few months trying to be something I'm not. Trying to fit into a world that's never been mine. Charlie's expression softened for a moment, but the softness quickly turned to frustration. Ellie, I don't understand what you want from me. I can't change my parents. They've always been like this. You knew that when you married me. Did I? I whispered. Did I really know? Because I didn't know how much of me I would have to give up to fit into your world. Charlie, I didn't know how much of myself I would lose. He didn't respond. He just stood there, his eyes focused on the floor, the silence between us heavier than any words could have been. In that moment, I realized something that hurt more than anything else. The man I had married, the man I had loved, had chosen his family's expectations over me. He had chosen their comfort, their way of life, over my happiness. And as much as I wanted to believe otherwise, I could no longer ignore the truth. Charlie wasn't going to change. His allegiance lay with his parents, not with me. I stood there for a long while, watching him, waiting for some sign that things might be different, that he would finally see what was happening, that he would finally choose me. But the moment never came, and so, with a heavy heart, I walked away from him, from the bedroom, from the life we had built together. I wasn't sure where I was going. I wasn't sure what would happen next. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stay in this suffocating silence any longer. I couldn't stay in a marriage where I wasn't seen, where I wasn't heard. I couldn't stay in a marriage where my every move was controlled, my every decision questioned. I needed to find myself again. And that meant, for the first time in months, walking away. The garden party was supposed to be one of those events that marked the high point of the summer season, a chance to mingle with the local aristocracy and celebrate the Fitzwilliam legacy in full splendor. The sprawling lawns of the Fitzwilliam estate were manicured to perfection, with rows of pristine white tents and tables covered in fine linens. Champagne was flowing freely, and the guests, some familiar, many unfamiliar, were all dressed in their finest summer attire. Everything about the day felt like a carefully orchestrated performance. But the truth was, I could hardly breathe beneath the weight of it all. I had learned to play the part at these gatherings, or at least to pretend that I did. I smiled. I made small talk with the guests, and I listened as Charlie's family discussed their accomplishments, their history, and their wealth. But today, something inside me felt different. I was done pretending. I had spent so many months in this gilded cage, trying to fit into a world that didn't accept me, trying to conform to a family that never truly saw me. But no more. The tipping point had come that morning, when Lady Margaret had commented on my humble origins. Once again, she said it so casually, as if my background was something to be ashamed of, something to be tolerated. It was a throwaway comment, but it hit me like a slap across the face. And as the day wore on, I could feel the frustration building inside me, tightening like a knot in my chest. The afternoon wore on, and the party continued around me like a slow-moving tide. I was standing at one of the tables, holding a glass of champagne, trying to make small talk with a woman I didn't know very well. But I could see Lady Margaret across the lawn, holding court as usual, surrounded by her guests. She was laughing, but her eyes flicked over to me with that same calculating gaze she always had. It made my stomach churn. Charlie was standing next to his mother, chatting with Sir Reginald, his face set in that familiar mask of polite indifference. It was always like this at these events, his family, his world, and I was just an accessory, a decoration. I had never felt more out of place than I did in that moment, surrounded by the faces of people who would never understand me. And then, it happened. Lady Margaret's voice, sweet and sharp, floated across the garden as she spoke to one of her old friends. You know, Ellie's family comes from quite humble beginnings. It's rather charming, I suppose, that she's managed to adapt to our way of life. She let out a delicate laugh, the kind of laugh that made me feel like I was the subject of a joke I wasn't privy to. It's lovely, really, but I do wonder if she ever truly understands the weight of tradition, of history. The words were like ice water thrown in my face. My grip tightened around the champagne flute, and I felt a fire building inside me. I wanted to walk away, to retreat into the shadows like I always did. But something inside me snapped. Some last vestige of my old self demanding to be heard. I could feel the eyes of the entire room on me as I turned and walked toward the center of the garden, my heels clicking sharply on the stone path. I didn't stop to think. I didn't pause to reconsider. I was done. Done with pretending. Done with being silent. I stood at the edge of the table where Lady Margaret was seated, and for a long moment, I said nothing. The chatter around me died down as the guests noticed my presence. The weight of my silence suddenly too much to ignore. And then I spoke, my voice calm but firm, loud enough to carry over the hushed crowd. "I am not a puppet, Lady Margaret," I said, my eyes locking onto hers. "And I refuse to dance on strings. If this is what it means to be part of this family, then I would rather leave." There was a collective gasp. The entire garden seemed to hold its breath. The sound of the wind rustling in the trees, the only thing that filled the silence. Lady Margaret's face was a study in surprise, her expression faltering for a brief moment before she quickly regained her composure. But it was too late. The words had been said, and they hung in the air like a storm cloud waiting to break. The guests stared, some in confusion, others with the kind of curiosity that only comes from witnessing something uncomfortably out of place. But I didn't care. I didn't care about their judgment, about the way they looked at me like I was some strange, uninvited guest. I had had enough. Charlie was standing a few feet away, frozen in place. His face was pale, his eyes wide, as if he couldn't quite believe what I had just said. I could see the conflict in his gaze, the fear, the confusion. But there was something else, too. Something I hadn't noticed before. Something I couldn't ignore anymore. He wasn't coming to my defense. He wasn't standing by me. I took another step forward, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I have tried, for months now, to fit into this world. I've tried to please everyone, to be what you all wanted me to be. But I can't do it anymore. I won't." The room was dead silent, the weight of my words settling over them like a thick fog. I could feel the eyes of the guests on me, but I refused to look away. My gaze was fixed on Charlie now, my heart pounding in my chest. "I married you, Charlie," I said, my voice rising ever so slightly. "I didn't marry your family. But it seems like I've been living in their shadow, trying to be something I'm not. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of being treated like I'm not good enough, like I'm some charity case." There was a beat of silence, and then I turned back to Lady Margaret, who was sitting there, her mouth slightly open, her hands poised on her lap. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling before her eyes, and I felt a strange sense of satisfaction in knowing that I had finally said what I had been too afraid to say for so long. "If this is how it's going to be," I continued, my voice barely above a whisper but carrying with a finality that made everyone take notice, "then I'm done. I won't be a part of this family if it means losing myself. I'd rather leave and start over than live in a cage of your expectations." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The kind of silence that only comes when something monumental has just been said, when the very foundation of something has shifted. And then, a voice broke through the tension, Charlie's voice, quiet and strained. "Ellie," he whispered, taking a step toward me. "Please." But I didn't want to hear it anymore. I didn't want to hear him make excuses for them. For the family that had never truly accepted me. I had reached the breaking point, and I was no longer willing to stay silent, no longer willing to hide in the shadows. "I'm done, Charlie," I said, my voice steady now, filled with the clarity of someone who had finally found their voice. "I won't be your puppet any longer." And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving the silence of the garden party behind me. The weight of the decision was heavy, but for the first time in a long while, I felt free. The room remained still, frozen in the wake of my words, and as I stepped away, I knew I had made the choice I needed to make. What came next, I wasn't sure, but for the first time in months, I had taken control of my own life. And I wasn't going back. The house felt different in the wake of what I had said at the garden party. A strange tension hung in the air, like a storm cloud on the horizon, its dark presence looming over everything. The clinking of fine china at dinner, the soft murmur of voices in the sitting room, it all seemed so hollow now. There was no escaping the aftermath of my words, no way to undo what had been said. And I couldn't tell if that was a relief or a burden. I had expected the silence that followed my confrontation, but the silence that came after was something deeper, more suffocating. It wasn't just that the air was thick with unspoken judgment. It was the weight of the choices I had made, of what I had dared to do, to say, and the irrevocable nature of it all. That evening, Charlie hadn't spoken to me much. We'd both retreated to the house after my stand in the garden, and he'd gone straight to his study, his back stiff, his footsteps heavier than I'd ever heard them. He hadn't even looked at me when I passed him in the hallway. It was like I was invisible. I wasn't sure how long I sat in the drawing room after that, staring into the fire, the flames flickering in front of me, as if mocking me, reminding me of the heat of the moment. I had been angry. I had been frustrated. But now, with the words hanging in the air, I felt a kind of emptiness settle into me, a kind of quiet after the storm. But it wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. The next day, Charlie came to me with the same quiet intensity I had seen in him so many times before. He was caught between worlds, between me, his wife, and his parents, the people who had raised him and shaped his identity. It was clear to me that he was torn. But even more than that, he was scared. "I think we need to talk," Charlie said, standing in the doorway of our room. His voice was softer than usual, the tension in his posture betraying his internal conflict. I didn't respond right away. What was there to say? What was left to say? "Ellie, please. Don't make this harder than it already is," he continued. His words were rushed, like he was trying to keep up with the pace of his own thoughts. "I know things have been difficult, but you can't just walk away from this. From me. From everything." I looked up at him, my expression calm but my heart racing. "I'm not asking you to choose, Charlie. I never asked you to choose. But I can't live in this house anymore. I can't live in a family that doesn't accept me for who I am." He took a step toward me, his face tight with worry. "Ellie, they're my parents. I can't just ignore them. You know that. They've given us so much. The house, the legacy, everything we have." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "I can't just throw it all away." I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of his words sink into me. This wasn't about throwing anything away. It was about not losing myself in the process. But he didn't see it that way. To him, it was all a matter of loyalty to his family, to the life they had built. And I was beginning to see that loyalty would always come first. "You don't get it, do you?" I said, my voice quieter now, but no less firm. "I'm not asking for much, Charlie. I just want a life where I'm seen, where I'm not just your wife in their eyes, but me in my own. I've tried. I've really tried, but I can't keep pretending anymore." Charlie's face hardened, a flicker of frustration crossing his features. "You're being unreasonable. They mean well, Ellie. They're just trying to make sure you fit in. They've never tried to understand me." I shot back, my voice rising with the heat of old wounds. "They've never once tried to make me feel like I belong. All they've done is remind me that I don't belong, that I'm not enough." He opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Instead, he just stood there, looking at me as if he didn't know who I was anymore, as if I had become some stranger to him. And in that moment, I realized the truth. I was no longer the woman I had been when we first married. I wasn't the woman who had walked down the aisle full of hope and belief in the future we would build. I was someone else now, someone who was losing herself in the face of a family that didn't want her, a marriage that didn't see her, and a life that felt like it was closing in. I didn't want to lose Charlie. I loved him, and I still believed in the man I had married. But I couldn't stay here, in this place, where everything I did felt like a performance. I couldn't keep suffocating under the weight of expectations that weren't mine to bear. By the time dinner rolled around, the tension in the house had become unbearable. Lady Margaret and Sir Reginald had made it clear that they were not happy with my defiance. They didn't say it outright, of course, they never did. But their disapproving glances, the way they spoke to me as though I were a child who needed instruction, told me everything I needed to know. I was the problem. I was the one who had disrupted their carefully constructed world. And now, they were making sure I knew it. Later that night, I found myself in the bedroom, standing in front of the mirror, looking at the woman who had once been so full of confidence, of independence, the woman who had once known exactly who she was and what she wanted. But now I wasn't sure. I had spent so long trying to make this work, trying to make Charlie's world my own, trying to find a place for myself within his family's cold walls. But it wasn't working. It wasn't even close. I had tried to be the good wife, the dutiful daughter-in-law, the woman they wanted me to be, but I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep bending to a family that didn't even see me as an individual, a person with my own thoughts, my own desires, my own identity. And so, as I stood there, staring at my reflection, I made the decision. I wasn't going to stay in this cage any longer. I wasn't going to live a life where I was constantly reminded of how little I mattered. I packed my things quietly, methodically. The familiar sound of zippers and the soft rustling of clothes was strangely soothing, like the sound of a decision being made. A decision that, despite all the fear and uncertainty, felt like the only choice I had left. I could hear Charlie moving around in the hallway, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. This wasn't just about leaving a house. It wasn't just about leaving Charlie's family. It was about finding myself again, about reclaiming the life I had lost somewhere along the way. As I closed the suitcase, I looked around the room one last time. It hadn't been our dream. It had been a dream imposed on us, on me. And now, I was walking away from it. When I walked out of the room, I didn't look back. The house was eerily quiet. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was no sound of dinner being prepared, no laughter echoing through the halls, no gentle hum of conversation. The stillness was almost unbearable, as though the house itself knew that something was coming to an end. My footsteps, light but determined, seemed to fill the space with a hollow weight as I made my way down the staircase and into the living room. Charlie was sitting on the far side of the room, his back to the fire. The soft flickering of the flames cast a warm glow over him, but it did nothing to soften the distance between us. His head was lowered, his hands clasped in his lap, his posture rigid. He wasn't looking at me, not yet. But I knew he was aware of my presence. He had been aware of every subtle shift in the atmosphere since the garden party, since I had made my stand. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching him. My heart ached, but my resolve remained unshaken. This was what I had to do. This was the only way out. Finally, he lifted his eyes, and our gazes met across the room. There was no anger in them, no harshness, only confusion, pain, a kind of emptiness I hadn't seen before. "Ellie," he said quietly, his voice hoarse, as though he hadn't spoken in hours. "Are you really doing this? Leaving?" I nodded, unable to speak at first. There was so much I wanted to say, so much I needed him to understand, but the words caught in my throat. The truth was, I didn't know where to begin. He didn't move, but his eyes seemed to search mine, pleading for something, anything. But I couldn't give him what he wanted. Not anymore. "Charlie," I began, my voice surprisingly steady. "I've been thinking about this for a long time. About us. About what I've been feeling, and what I haven't been feeling." He shifted in his chair, as if the words had hit him harder than he'd anticipated. "What do you mean? I don't understand. You're angry. I get that. But you can't just throw everything away. We have a life together. We've always had a life together." I took a deep breath, stepping into the room fully now. I didn't want to leave it like this, with him not understanding, not seeing the truth that had been eating away at me for so long. I needed to explain, even if it was the last conversation we'd ever have. "I'm not throwing everything away, Charlie," I said softly, my eyes never leaving his. "I'm just not willing to live like this anymore. I can't keep pretending. I can't keep being invisible." His face faltered for a moment, the familiar hardness in his features softening. "Invisible?" he repeated, his voice cracking slightly. "Ellie, you're not invisible to me. You've never been invisible to me." But I knew what he meant. I knew what he thought he meant. But that wasn't enough. Not anymore. "You don't understand," I said, shaking my head. "You don't see me, Charlie. Not really. I've spent all this time trying to fit into your world, trying to make everyone happy. But what about me? What about the woman I was before all of this?" He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand to stop him. I wasn't angry anymore. I was tired. So tired of fighting for a place in a world that never wanted me. I don't want to be the woman who hides in the background anymore. I don't want to be the woman who lets you and your parents dictate who I am. I've lost myself, Charlie. And I can't keep doing that. Not for you. Not for anyone. There was a long pause, and I could see his mind working, trying to process the words I had just thrown at him. I saw him trying to understand, trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the woman he thought he had married. But there was no reconciling it, not now. "You can't just leave," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're my wife. We've built this life together." "I haven't built it," I replied, my voice stronger now, though my heart ached. "You've built it. We built it. But not together. It's been about you and your family, Charlie. And I've been living in the shadows, pretending to be a part of it. But I'm not. I never was. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He was torn, caught between the woman he had married and the family he had always known. But I couldn't wait for him to choose me. I couldn't wait for him to finally see what was so obvious to me now. I've tried, I said, my voice cracking just slightly. I've tried to be part of your world. I've tried to make it work. But you and your parents, they don't see me. They don't respect me. And you haven't protected me, Charlie. You haven't stood by me. Not in the way I needed. I did protect you, he said desperately. I've always tried to protect you. But this is my family. I can't just abandon them. I can't turn my back on them. I shook my head, the tears that I had been holding back finally welling up in my eyes. That's just it, isn't it? You've never been able to choose me over them. Not once. And I can't keep living like this, Charlie. I can't keep being someone I'm not. I can't stay in a place where I feel invisible. For a long time, there was only silence between us. The kind of silence that only comes after a truth has been spoken. The kind of silence that settles deep in your bones. A heaviness that makes it impossible to breathe. And then, very quietly, Charlie stood up. He didn't say anything else. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't try to convince me to stay. He just stood there, looking at me as though he had no idea what to do with the woman standing in front of him. The woman he had promised to love and protect. I turned away first, unable to look at him anymore, unable to see the man who had once promised me everything. But now, I couldn't help but feel like I was walking away from a version of him that had never really existed. I went upstairs to pack my things. It wasn't a grand gesture, wasn't dramatic. It was simply the act of picking up the pieces of my life, the things that belonged to me, and putting them into a suitcase. There was no rush, no anger, just a quiet finality. As I stood in the doorway, looking back at the life I had once thought I would build here, I felt nothing but a strange sense of peace. For the first time in months, I felt free. I closed the door behind me and walked down the stairs, suitcase in hand. I didn't look back. Not at Charlie. Not at the house. Not at the life that could have been mine if I had been willing to live in the shadows. As I stepped outside, I breathed deeply, the cool night air filling my lungs. The world was wide open, uncertain, but mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally stepping into the light. The road stretched out before me, quiet and undisturbed, leading away from the Fitzwilliam estate and into the uncertain expanse of the night. The only sound was the soft crunch of gravel beneath my feet, the distant hum of the wind in the trees, and my own breath, steady and deep as I walked away. The weight of the past few months, of everything I had endured, was finally lifting, bit by bit, with every step I took away from that house. I wasn't sure where I was going. I didn't have a destination in mind. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I was moving towards something for me, something I could claim as my own. The life I had known, the life I had tried so hard to build within the walls of that grand house, was behind me now. I wasn't sure if it was gone for good or if it would haunt me in quiet moments, but I knew one thing: I couldn't go back. Not to that life. Not to the woman I had become there. I glanced over my shoulder one last time, just for a moment, but the sight of the towering estate, with its grand windows and well-kept gardens, didn't fill me with sorrow. It filled me with relief. I had been trapped in that gilded cage, caught in a life that wasn't mine, bending and breaking to meet the expectations of people who couldn't see me, who wouldn't see me. And I had thought I had no choice but to stay. But now I knew differently. The path ahead was unclear. And with it, the future seemed like a vast, open space. There was no certainty, no promises. But there was a strange freedom in that. A freedom I hadn't known in years. I thought about Charlie. I thought about the man I had loved and the life we had once dreamed of. But as the wind whipped through the trees, carrying with it the last of the evening's light, I realized something that had been brewing inside me for months. I wasn't just walking away from him. I was walking away from the version of myself I had let slip away. I was reclaiming the woman I had lost, the woman who wasn't afraid to speak, to choose, to live for herself. And that was enough for now. I had learned a hard lesson. I had learned that silence isn't the same as respect. Silence is compliance. It's the quiet acceptance of a life that isn't your own, of being a shadow in someone else's world. I had stayed silent for so long, telling myself it was easier, telling myself it was polite. But the truth is, I had silenced myself, and in doing so, I had lost who I was. But not anymore. I don't owe anyone my silence, I whispered to myself, the words hanging in the air like a promise. Especially not when it comes at the cost of losing who I am. And with that, I walked away. The future, like the road ahead, was uncertain, but I was resolute. I didn't know what was waiting for me, whether I would find a new life, whether Charlie and I would ever reconcile, or whether I would find peace without him. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I had taken control of my own life again, and that, in itself, was the beginning of something new. As I continued walking, the Fitzwilliam estate slowly fading into the distance behind me, I felt the weight of the past fall away with every step, and though I couldn't see the end of the road, I was certain of one thing. The freedom to choose was mine. And for now, that was enough. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss out on the next story. Please subscribe now to keep following more stories and turn on the notification bell to get exclusive updates straight to your inbox. Your support helps me keep creating these stories that speak to the heart.